Can you always win every war, whether that is in business, military, or even your personal life? What if I told you there are strategies you can learn to increase your probability to success? In this video, we will break down Greene's book on 33 strategies of war, where he offers strategic insights based on a synthesis of military history, historical writings on strategy, and contemporary business transactions. Greene argues that applying these principles of strategy can help you flourish in almost any area of life. We will begin by discussing strategies pertaining to the broad picture, which is where you will begin formulating your strategy. Then, we will discuss how you construct your plan and how to prevent your enemies from gaining sufficient knowledge to counter it. Next, we will discuss Greene's recommendations for fighting a vast enemy with a small force. Lastly, we'll talk about Greene's suggestions for eliminating your rivals. Before we start, if this is your first time to my channel, please watch the last video I made on 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, which will give you a complete guide on power, strategy, and influence if you want to take full control of your life. First of all, let's understand who you're fighting and why it's hard to wage a war if you don't know what you're fighting for. As Greene explains, the first step in developing a strategy is to determine your desired end state. What are you hoping to achieve by fighting? Your ultimate objective should be sufficiently daring to be motivating while being modest enough to be attainable. Understanding your ultimate objective can help you succeed in any aspect of life, not just business or military strategy. So how do you identify your enemies to create polarity? Once you have an understanding of your ultimate objective, you must have a clear picture of who or what stands between you and that objective, for example, your enemies. Clearly identifying your enemies, according to Greene, is not only necessary for developing a strategy to defeat them, it will also help you better comprehend what you stand for. This is due to the fact that the conflict will highlight the contrast between you and your adversary, thereby highlighting your main differences. For instance, if you're competing against an incumbent politician who supported an unpopular tax, you might present yourself as an opponent of the tax. Or perhaps you sell lawnmowers and your primary competitor guarantees the lowest prices in town but has a below-average customer service record. Instead of competing on price, you go above and beyond to ensure that your customers are satisfied. In both instances, comparing yourself to your opponent informs your efforts to distinguish yourself. Next, how do you use the power of knowledge? You may start planning your war after you know what you want to achieve and who your foes are. Greene proposes that you immerse yourself in the best available information on the environment in which you'll be fighting, the state of your own troops, and the opponents you must defeat in order to do this. Try to predict how your opponents will react to each of your movements. Consider several outcomes and establish thorough preparations for how you would respond to each probable scenario. Greene recommends building thorough plans that branch out into many different scenarios because it helps you to adjust fast to changing conditions. Plans that rely on a strict schedule often fail because things never go exactly as planned. Therefore, you need to strategize with limited information. As Greene notes, having a flexible plan with well-considered alternatives can help you avoid making irrational decisions when you are under stress or under the influence of strong emotions. The significance of regulating powerful emotions is a frequent subject that Greene covers in various tactics, but especially in planning. He warns that humans are more emotional than rational in most situations. For example, if you meet losses and strong opposition, you may become discouraged and be tempted to give up too soon. In the face of vicious attacks, you may feel enraged and spiteful toward your adversary, making it tempting to retaliate in ways that harm them while also harming your own cause. And the euphoria of success may make you feel invincible, prompting you to launch unwise new attacks. Now you understand how to figure out who your enemies are and how to use your power of knowledge. But how do you keep your enemies guessing? The better you foresee what your opponents will do, the easier it will be to devise a strategy to defeat them. However, the better your adversaries predict what you will do, the more successfully they will oppose it. As a result, preventing your adversaries from discovering what you're up to until it's too late is a critical component of any strategy. Greene explains numerous approaches to accomplishing this. Greene suggests that you leave your choices open. The more actions you can do, the more difficult it is for someone to predict what you will do. He proposes breaking up your army into small squads that can function autonomously, but can also join forces to fight larger battles to maximize the flexibility of your forces. Furthermore, this increases the amount of distinct forces that your opponent must try to keep track of, making it more difficult to forecast your actions or infer your overall strategy. So how do you stay ahead with bold and unconventional maneuvers? When launching an offensive, Greene advises keeping your forces moving quickly enough that your opponent does not have time to react. You'll be well into your second or third move by the time they find out how to counter your first, making their reaction useless. He also proposes that you make a move that appears to be so daring, brazen, or unorthodox that it appears mad. If your opponents wrongly believe that you would never do something reckless, they will interpret your bold movements as a sign of greater authority than you actually have. They won't be able to foresee your moves as readily because they misjudged your strength. Even if they don't make that error, you'll be more difficult to read because an illogical opponent is, by definition, unpredictable. Moving ahead, Greene mentioned not to let small size hold you back. What do I mean by that? When you first go on any conquest, your opponents are likely to have more resources than you. This, however, is not always a problem. Smaller armies, according to Greene, are more mobile and easier to conceal. And if you don't appear to be a major threat, your opponents may simply ignore you. Greene believes that you can take advantage of this by growing your empire through a series of modest conquests. You unexpectedly gain possession of something that is not worth your opponent's time or energy to battle over. Then wait for people to forget about your previous conquest while you build up your power. You can repeat the technique once they've forgotten about it. Greene claims that over time you may silently take over a big territory without anyone noticing until it's too late to stop you. However, you need to avoid pitched battles. Greene says head-to-head battles are expensive and indecisive. Therefore, avoid them, especially if you're little and have few resources. Greene advocates working your way into a situation where your strengths are placed against your opponent's weaknesses, and their strengths and weaknesses are less significant to win efficiently. Greene advises smart withdrawal when a large, powerful opponent confronts you. Avoiding significant casualties in a pitched combat gives you more time to prepare, and it usually motivates your opponent to chase you, allowing you to lure them to a spot where you can fight them on your terms. Greene believes the defender is statistically more likely to win any fight than the aggressor. Another strategy you can incorporate is guerrilla tactics, which are best for battling a powerful enemy with a small force. Make minor attacks on your opponent's weaknesses and steal their goods to boost your resources. Few guerrilla raids injure your enemy, but many minor raids add up. This exhausts your opponent without letting them fight you. It also proves they can't bully you even in retreat. So how do you plan a decisive victory won? You need to target the source of your enemy's power. Greene suggests considering your enemy's power source first. What allows your enemy to hinder you? You may be outgunned, but their high-tech weapons depend on a continual supply stream. Hence, their strength is their supply lines. Cut their supply lines, and they can't fight you. 2. You need to target a vulnerable spot. Greene suggests identifying your enemy's weakest points. Inflicting disproportionately large deaths in a vulnerable place improves your prospects in the combat, even if the vulnerability isn't their strength. Greene says that in traditional combat, an army's front was strong, but its flanks and rear were weaker. A flanking maneuver involves sending a small element of your force to assault the opponent head-on, while the rest circles around to attack them from the side or rear. When your flanking force arrived, the enemy's sides and rear would be vulnerable since they were focused on the front. It would take time for them to reorient. You might easily inflict huge casualties during this vulnerability. Generalizing this tactic, Greene suggests circumventing your enemy's frontal defenses. 3. Lastly, you can break down the problem and eliminate one piece at a time. Greene says one of the best methods to defeat an enemy force is to isolate and crush little troops one by one. By sending a large army against a tiny opposing force, you increase your chances of victory. Greene claims that when the target group discovers they are separated from their army, anxiety or fear would ensue. Panicked soldiers fight poorly and make irrational mistakes, making them easier to defeat. Another piece of Greene's advice warns, this tactic could backfire. To motivate your troops, Greene says that when escape or relief is not an option, people can fight so hard they seem indestructible. When you surround an enemy unit, they may panic or regard the situation as hopeless, making them easier to beat, or they may become more self-reliant and resourceful out of need, making them tougher to defeat. So there you have it, folks. Hopefully you learned something from this video. Watch my other content I have posted and please like and subscribe to this channel and leave a comment. Until next time.